As I'm finishing this path, presentation mastery, my job is to reflect on the speeches I gave and what I learned through the process. But I want to take this one step further and talk about what I learned since the last speech that I gave. As like most of us, throughout a path, we give a variety of speeches on all different topics. For example, I gave one talking about my role leading the culture committee here at US Digital. I talked about some programs that we put in place to help employees engage with each other outside of the regular workspace. After the first of the year, when we were talking about New Year's resolutions, I gave a speech talking about how we can ensure that we're able to make personal changes that we want to make. And I talked about the fallacy that we often fall into, blaming everything on our lack of self-control, because that's just one component of it. I also gave a speech about learning Russian. I talked about the inconsistencies and the difficulties in learning that language. But I let you know that I'm committed to learning it because of the relationships I want to create with fellow employees. But I did give a series of speeches to challenge myself and hopefully to challenge some of you to look at our criminal justice system and ask, is this what we really want? I gave a speech about the bail system and talked about, is it fair? Is it accomplishing its intended goals, or are there too many unintended consequences that are happening? I introduced you to Dante, a young man growing up in a poor community with no parents, no guidance. To belong, he joined a gang. And in his initiation into that gang, he was arrested, his only arrest. In that same speech, I talked about the common use of ridiculously long sentences that don't match the crime. I talked about if that had applied to him, with those minimum harsh sentences, would either he or society been better off at the end of that sentence? Fortunately for him, he was able to enter an alternative program, and he had some really good talents that was able to be channeled in a proper direction. I also introduced you to Sandra, a gal who, because of a minor offense, lost her job, and it dumped her into a downward, hopeless spiral. I talked about the need for penal institutions to be helpful institutions. What I didn't know, and based on your answers, most of us didn't know, is that there was a new law that is actually in place now. It was put in place in 2018. Before I talk about that, I want to ask you a question, because it's my general belief that one political party presents itself as being more compassionate, and one presents itself as being the party of law and order. Don't worry, I'm not going to get too political here. The question I ask you is not which party you think is more compassionate, but which party do you think presents itself as being more compassionate? So if you think the Republican Party is the one that presents itself as being more compassionate, give me a thumbs up. And if you think the Democrat Party is the one that presents itself as being more compassionate, give me a thumbs up. Okay, based on the responses and my belief, I was very surprised to see the legislation that got passed in 2018. But before I go to that, I am not in any way in this speech trying to indicate that one party is more sympathetic or compassionate than another, or that one's better than another, but just, we'll talk about that bill. Not long ago in Toastmasters, we had the theme danger. And during the talk about danger, the tabletop part, the question was asked, what is the most dangerous information As I didn't answer then, I'm going to answer now. The most dangerous information is what we always listen to. What do I mean by that? If you're a conservative and you only listen to conservative talk, that is the most dangerous thing for you. If you tend to be more liberal and all you listen to is liberal talk, that is the most dangerous thing to you. I'm going to step out on a limb here and say, if people follow that guidance, I don't think January 6th would have ever happened. I used to belong to one of those groups, and I've challenged myself to listen to other voices. So over the last few months, I read the book United by Cory Booker. I read the 1619 Project. I read How to Be Anti-Racist. But at the same time, I've also read the book Breaking History by Jared Kushner, a book about conservative economics, and The American Story by Rubenstein. I think it is incredibly valuable for us to listen to different voices. Get off my soapbox, and let's talk about the bill. It's called the First Step Act. Now, Bob's not here today, but he's the one person that should recognize what this is all about, because First Step is an acronym, and he's the king of acronyms in our club. So First Step stands for Formerly Incarcerated, Re-enter Society, Transform, Safely Transitioning Every Person Act. I'm sure you'll want to memorize that. Now, this bill embodied much of the things I've been arguing about in some of my speeches, and it has even more things as well. But remember, this is not a theoretical bill, but something that started changing lives the moment President Trump signed it, and is still changing lives every day for the better. It was obvious to me, after reading it and looking at some of the details, that this is all about rehabilitation as opposed to punishment, which is what I think the system should do. This was both a prison reform act and a sentencing reform act. You may recall in a previous speech, I quoted Obama, who talked about, if you've committed a low-level nonviolent crime, you owe something to society, but you don't owe it 20 years, and you for sure don't owe it a life sentence. This bill allowed judges immediately to begin handing down sentences that more closely matched the crime that they committed. And people who were incarcerated, it allowed many of them, if they had these severe sentences, to apply for resentencing. That's a big deal. Then talk about the prison system. One of the things that I wasn't aware of is oftentimes a person's incarcerated totally across the country, another state, which makes visitation very difficult. This law tries to reduce the distance between the family and where the person's incarcerated. It also directed the director of Bureau of Prisons to talk about what programs they had in place, and we're talking about evidence-based drug programs, and give a report on that. It also talked about people getting good time credits for their good behavior, which could allow them to get out early, but it also enables them to participate in vocational training. It's a big deal. Other things, the Bureau of Prison staff was required to go through de-escalation training, including being able to identify mental illness issues. And this is something I wasn't aware of, is restraints that had been used on pregnant inmates. It was required before, during, and after delivery. That was removed. The last thing I'll mention, I don't have time for all the details, is wardens were instructed to partner with community-based programs that had a track record of reducing recidivism. Now, I've talked here about what a great bill it is, but everything's not the way you would like it to be. Because just actually within the last few weeks, the Bureau of Prisons wrote their own rules to more narrowly define who could apply for resentencing. And each year, Congress has to fund the programs that are part of this bill. So throughout the path, I have learned, I have grown in my speaking ability, in my leadership ability, but because of the topics I talked about, I've also grown in being more compassionate to people who may not look like me or may not think like me. In Toastmasters, may we never stop growing together.